You want to just put your hand up and Ken will come around and give you it? Okay, so we are cruising through some pretty intense themes. So who can tell me what we talked about last week? Abortion, that's right. So Dustin led us in a conversation about abortion. So today is going to be a little bit different. I'm giving you guys the handout, but I'm also giving you guys basically all my notes. And the reason why I'm giving you all my notes is because as it is the continued trend for Dustin and I, we will probably not get through all of my notes. And so what I wanted to do is give you guys kind of what I've been working on this week as a resource for you. So if addictions are something that you want to look into more, this is kind of the stuff that I came up with. So that's that. What we're going to do is we're going to break up the morning into a number of different sections. I'm going to give a definition of what addictions are. And then we're going to talk about the types of addictions. We're going to talk about the origins of addictions. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the brain at that point, which I find quite interesting. And then we're going to talk about... what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about patterns and these cycles that we can fall into. And then we'll talk about the image of God in alcoholic and addictions. And then we will hopefully finish with some treatments for breaking the cycle. So that's kind of what the morning's going to look like. So let's get into it. Who knows somebody in their lives who has an addiction? Who's trying that? Okay, so a lot of us, right? It's a very common thing that we've seen in our culture, which, is very sad. And what I want to do is help us to understand how addictions work in our brain, and how addictions are not the thing that we need to put our identity in. So the definition I have for addiction is: an addiction is any thinking or behavior that is habitual, repetitious, and very difficult or impossible to control regardless of the consequences. Okay, so there are two types of addictions, from my understanding. There is a substance addiction, so that can be things like compulsive use of substance despite harmful consequences like alcohol or heroin or caffeine. But then there's process addictions. And these are compulsive behaviors that continue despite harmful consequences. They are behaviors that are repetitious, okay? So it can be gambling, pornography, work. Other ones could be things like social media, different times, or the amount of time that you're going on your phone. There are different origins when it comes to addictions. There's the genetic origin, so which estimates about 40 to 60% come of addicts. It comes from it's a genetic thing, right? So if their father or mother has an addiction, there is a tendency for their children to experience that addiction or a similar addiction as well. Have you guys found that to be true for people who are addicts in that you know in your life? That you can see a bit of a pattern with like maybe their parents and their parents before? You know? I would say I could see that with people I know, and even in my own life as well. There's also this thing called a nurture approach. And so studies show that our upbringing can also play a very significant role of when addictions start. Okay? And there's a number of different facets that comes from what this looks like. There would be there would be a tendency to not be able to regulate yourselves well. So this just means that when we're children, we are taught how to regulate ourselves well. We can deal with a healthy childhood. You deal with emotions well. You deal with bad situations well, and your parents will teach you how to deal with them well. If you are unable to regulate yourself well in these situations, or if you don't feel safe, there is a tendency when you get older to find things that cause you to feel safe. All right, so they are the things that cause you to regulate yourselves and to kind of calm you down when you're stressed or in an unsafe environment. Okay, and so that these actions can be things like going and having a drink, or gambling, or going to the same websites that you know will cause you to feel better. There's also a trauma element to it. Trauma is a very interesting thing. It impacts how you view reality. So parts of our brain in trauma, they tend to turn to a constant high stress state of survival mode. And drugs or process addictions are often used to help numb this pain that we aren't willing or wanting to deal with. And then there's also an environmental element to it. So this can include, so let's say you are raised with, or you are surrounded with people who your social circle is all about going to the bar, okay? And if you make that into your regular routine, your identity can be shaped into that, and it can become an addiction as well, because that's what your social standing is. That's what normal people do, and to not do that means that you're outside of this social scenario. Are you guys understand kind of what I'm saying so far? Do you guys have any questions so far? Okay. Yep. Right. Yeah. So it would be a bit of both. So there would be genetically there would be a tendency toward that addiction, but also if you're growing up with your parents experiencing that addiction, you will also see that, right? So it's a bit of both that's going on with that. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Okay. Right. So we are going to talk a little bit about the brain when it comes to addictions. All right. So I'm going to try my best to explain this well for us. But I might have to ask Jolyn to help clarify some things for me. So how addictions work is that it actually hijacks your reward system in your brain by flooding it with dopamine, which is the drug responsible for pleasure and motivation. Okay? So how it works is that there's like a pathway in your brain And this pathway, oh, I totally lost it. Sorry, guys. It is like a pathway in your brain that you go to make yourself feel good. Okay, so when good things happen or when you do good things, there's this chemical in your brain called dopamine. Okay, and it gets flood to your prefrontal cortex, so the front part of your brain, and that's when you feel really good, right? So you finish a task, right? You feel good about yourself. Okay, and they are these increment doses of dopamine, which is a chemical in your brain that makes you feel good. Okay? So, what certain addictions do is that they increase the level of dopamine in that pathway by 100-fold. And so instead of experiencing, I would say, a healthy amount of dopamine, it's like a flood that just gets rushed through in this pathway. Does that make sense? Is that kind of helpful, John? Yeah? Okay. I promise I won't look at you the whole time. Okay. No, it's all good. It's all good. And so a helpful analogy that has helped me is that if you were to imagine a river in your head, okay, that river has been going, the water that's been going, and that's whatever the area where the water that's been going in this one direction, okay, has over time decayed the sides of the walls, and it's made that one stream very powerful. Does that make sense? So imagine that is your brain, okay? Okay, now we're going to come back to the river analogy, but just, yeah. So with substance addictions, they affect your brain in different ways because you are taking these substances for different reasons. Okay, so for some substances, you're taking them to reduce pain. Okay, and so when you're taking them to reduce pain, your brain is starting to shift, and it's starting to tell you that you need to keep taking these substances so you don't feel pain. Okay, so instead of dealing with the pain, you take these drugs to help reduce that pain. All right. With process addictions, they're a little bit different, and they can be harder for us to kind of navigate because for some of these processes, there's like a normal amount that you do it, and the reason why you do it can be different. So let's say, for example, I go to the casino for an evening, and I take $20 with me, and I want to just gamble it away and see what happens at the end of the night. Okay, that that's a different conversation, but let's say theoretically that is okay. I'll say just right now that's okay. Okay. Now, when it becomes an addiction is when that action becomes a dependency. Okay, and so let's use work for an example, right? I would say that there's a very high percentage of people who are addicted to work. And I think we see this when people try to stop doing work, and they feel at times like they're experiencing just an increasing level of unease in themselves, to the point that they get really anxious and really angry for very small reasons. Okay, and so that this can be at times a type of withdrawal that people are experiencing. Now, it's hard for work, for example, or for, specifically for work, because we are, as people who are made in the image of God, designed to work, okay? To honor God with what we do. But I think the difference is when that work becomes the thing you worship, instead of worshiping God through what you do. Does that make sense? Okay. And so what happens with addictions is that there's this thing called tolerance, where after continually going back to a substance or a process, you begin to feel that, you know what, this level of whatever, this type of let's say, drink that I keep coming back to, this type of beer that I keep coming back to, isn't giving me the same effect as it once did. So, what do? You would increase it, right? You would start drinking more so that you can have that same effect. So these feelings of positive euphoria, of feeling either numb to certain pains that you are experiencing, whether it's through trauma, okay, or through other things, that one drink or 4 drinks a night isn't actually doing it for you anymore. And you actually have to increase that amount. And there's also different signs that, you would be, you would fall under this addiction kind of mindset. One of them is something interesting that your brain does when somebody tries to tell you that you might have a problem. What do you think that would be? What do you think the brain would do when someone tries to tell you that you have a problem? Agree with them. Deny. You deny it, right? Your brain, and what's very interesting about your brain is that it actually sets up these like walls. And it tries like convincing your subconscious that you don't actually have a problem, that you have it fully under control, right? Is this language that you guys have heard before, right? Or it's somebody else's fault. That's right. They have a very hard time accepting that there's something going on in their life, right? And they can really do a good job of making excuses. So going back to that the workaholic example, right? What would be some excuses that they would use to avoid accepting that they actually have a problem? What would be some of the things they would say? All right. Or I need this for my family, right? God calls us to work. That's right. So there's this language that we use to, at times, make us feel better. And when people are trying to confront us with it, and there's a denial that's going on, our brains can start shifting and setting up these walls. So it's very interesting. There'd be common reasons why people would go back to their addiction. Okay? So these common reasons, first actually can just be boredom. You're just bored. And you know that there is this one thing that I could do that would cause me to not feel bored. So your brain starts developing these cycles where you keep coming back to this. So boredom is a very common one. There's an increase of emotion like anger or sadness. So when you get like really ticked off or when something really tragic happens to you, your brain is actually wanting to come alongside you and comfort you. And if your brain has developed a pattern of knowing how to comfort you, it is going to really push you to do that thing that you will find comfort in. Does that make sense? There's definitely things called like triggers as well. So let's say the alcoholic who drives past the liquor store, who sees the flashing lights, right? It's like, okay, that can be a trigger that they can be drawn back to. The person who's addicted to porn, who has their phone and knows exactly where they can go to find some release. They know the browser, they know the site, they have mastered how to get there. And the last thing, kind of like what we talked about, is this idea of numbing. So, especially for people who've experienced mental or physical trauma, they can have this desire to, instead of dealing with the trauma, you find the thing that will cause you to be numbed more so you don't have to deal with it. That's why you see a lot for war veterans. They have a greater propensity for certain addictions because they don't want to have to deal with what they saw. They would much rather just numb it and move on with life. And so what happens over time with addictions is that there's this dependency, and with the dependency, there's like this decaying that goes on in our heads of motor skills. And so depending on the drug of choice, this decaying can happen quicker, but like how you respond to things will be delayed. Your tendency to want to care for other people will be reduced because all you're trying to focus on is yourself. What would be some other things? Like, when you're thinking of maybe addicts that you know, what are signs that it's kind of it's destroying their life? Solitary, yeah, right. Yep. They don't take care of themselves, right? Because they get really good at doing one thing, and that is finding that high. They get really good at it, and everything else becomes secondary. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't actually make any sense why you're doing this, right? Totally. Yeah. So again, workaholic, right? They're working so much their body is like, they're not taking care of their bodies. But all they're caring about is just working. Because they've put their identity in it. So when we talk about addictions and the image of God, there's a few different points here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. What I'm going to do is talk about two of them. I'm going to talk about the prisoned image and the dry alcoholic. Okay, so actually, you know what? I'm actually going to talk about the shame language and the dry alcoholic. So shame is this dominant force that fuels addictions. Okay? And often it comes up in how we would identify, how we would look at ourselves. Okay? And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to make a distinction between shame and guilt. Okay, guilt and shame are not the same things. Guilt is, I've done something bad, and it's a conviction that can lead to repentance. Okay? So it's going to our Father in heaven and telling him what we've done. It's like, God, I've done this, and I need your help, and I'm sorry. Okay? That is, it's recognizing that what I've done is wrong. Shame is different. It is telling us not that we've done something bad, but that we are bad. That we are this irredeemable and unforgivable person. That we hide from our Father like Adam and Eve did in the garden when we do something wrong. And Scripture does not tell us that we're good, but it is clear that because of what Christ has done, that he has made us into new creations and he has made us good. Okay? Do you guys understand that distinction? Interesting thing about shame is that it affects not just the addicts, as I'm sure you all have had experience with, or at least many. The last one is a dry alcoholic. Okay. So this is a bit of a, I would welcome more conversation on this. Who has heard of the statement, I'm an alcoholic, but I haven't had a drink in 10 years. I haven't had a drink in a long time. Hands up, have you ever heard that before? Yeah? Okay. What do you guys think of that statement? Do you agree with it? Celibate. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So it's that awareness of which area that you tend to sin. Yeah. Okay. What else? Mm-hmm. So, right, right, right. Yeah, right. So right. So, like, an example would be like, you had cancer, but now it's in remission. Okay. I think so. We're just gonna keep going. Okay. No, it's all good. So from my experience, with my addiction to lust for many years, one thing that I found I was doing a lot was saying, I am a follower of Jesus who struggles a lot with this area. And that's kind of how I identified myself for many years. And to a point where it's like I wanted my gravestone to say, Jordan Szeponski, uh, a one who struggled for Christ, and that struggle was always with my addiction to lust. And what I found over time is that my identity was in my struggle, and it wasn't actually in Christ. Personally, I do not like the language of people when people say, especially as a follower of Jesus, when they say, I am a Christian who's an alcoholic. I haven't touched a drop of alcohol in X amount of years. Because I think what it's doing is that it's not making Jesus the sole identity in your life. And two, it is reinforcing this propensity to sin in this way. That would be what I would say. And I'm not going to give you opportunity to give me feedback on that because we're going to keep going. So, timed that pretty well. All right. Okay, we're going to talk just briefly about some treatment things. One of the things with treatment, well, there's a lot. We're not going to get through all of it. That's why I gave you guys my notes. You can look at them. They can be a resource for you. I hope. So one of the things with treatment is that I'll say in my life, there's been a couple of very helpful tools that I've been able to put in my belt. All right. We talked about this idea of a river analogy at the beginning. One of the most incredible things that God has done with our brains is that He has made our brains flexible until death. That means that they are always learning, they are always adapting, they're always changing. As we get older, and as we develop routines that are more, set in our ways, they can be harder, but it's not impossible for those things to change. An example of that would be through addictions, okay? So we talked about that idea of the highway going to the pleasure part of our brains. That's just getting flooded with dopamine, and our brains are like, oh, I need this dopamine fix, so I'm going to go to pornography. I'm going to go to gambling. I'm going to go to heroin. Okay? And over time, this river gets deeper and deeper and thicker and thicker. So imagine if somebody came up to that river and took their finger and they just tried to make a little bit of a crevice that was going away from that one path. Where would the water go? At first, where would the water go? Along the river, right? Now, let's say that same person came back every day and just kept on putting their finger in the same path and trying to make it deeper and deeper. And over time, it got a little bit thicker, and then they were actually able to use a different tool than just their finger. Maybe they could use their hand. And over time, they could maybe use a shovel. They could just keep on. And let's say after a long amount of time, that new pathway got thicker and deeper than the original pathway. Where would the water go? It would go to the new one. It is helpful for us when we're thinking about addictions to think like that. There are these pathways that our brains have where it will always be the road, the pleasure part of our brain will always go toward the dopamine will always go toward the road least traveled and easiest to get to. That doesn't mean that those roads are permanent, and they can be moved. As someone who would consider themselves a former addict, there were a couple passages in Scripture that I found to be incredibly powerful for me, that I've seen differently from my perspective than someone who did experience an addiction. So Romans 12:2, which is a very well-known passage, is one of those. Especially when we're talking about this idea of the flexible brain. It says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing it you may discern what is the will of God, what is just and acceptable and perfect." Is this transformation language. And I know we're at the end of our time, but I'm just wanting to briefly talk about breaking the genetic cycle. Another really cool thing that I think God has done is that even though our addictions that we experience, if you experience an addiction, it has a genetic tendency toward it, so your children could have that addiction. If you defeat that addiction, if you overcome it, your children have a greater chance of actually having these barriers or shields up. You're rewriting the genetic code for your children, so that your children not only will have a much less chance of having an addiction tendency towards that specific addiction, they'll have a much less chance of having an addiction. So for myself, these have been two very big motivations for me. I think that when you're talking to somebody who has an addiction, or you do, it's important for you to find your motivation for why you want to stop. Whether that's one of these two things, or whether that's actually dealing with the thing that you're trying to avoid. Whether it's a pain or a memory, and allowing God to come in and say, you are not defined by this pain or memory. You are defined solely and exclusively on what I call you and on who I call you. That you are my child, that you have been bought by the blood, and that you've been redeemed. Have a great week, guys.